Hey guys, welcome back to more homeowner association stories. In this video, I inherited a ranch and an HOA president demands that I pay past dues for violating HOA rules. Let's dive right into the video. So 6 months ago, my father died unexpectedly of a heart attack. He was only 62 years old. As I am his only child, I inherited his ranch that is 10,000 acres. My life turned upside down in an instant. My wife, my 2 children and I had to pack up and head west to his ranch. But before we could do that, I had to tie up a lot of loose ends at my job in the city. My wife works from a distance, so fortunately was able to keep her job even with our move. I am an accountant by trade and was handling many files at my firm. However, thankfully I now have ranch hands to help me get used to living on the ranch again. It is where I grew up and worked side by side with my father until I met my wife in college. So I know in time I will get used to it again. While we were in the process of getting everything moved into our new home at the ranch, I was carrying boxes from the trailer we had rented when a fancy car came by. The man introduced himself as Rupert, president of the local HOA. "Your ranch is behind in fees," said Rupert. "If you don't pay up immediately, the HOA could take you to court. If it's not bad enough that your ranch is constantly violating rules, now you are behind in monthly payments too." "Can't you see that we're just moving in here?" I answered. "And don't you know that my father passed away? Don't you think that this bill could have waited at least a few more days to let us catch our breath?" "We have waited," said Rupert. "Like I said, you are severely behind, even from before your father's death. You know, with his age and all, he must have just let things get the better of him. My father was completely lucid and active until his last breath," I said. "He died of a heart attack, so whatever you're insinuating about him, I don't appreciate it." "Just pay the damn bill and keep the monthly fees paid," said Rupert. "And then I'll be out of your hair. You must pay your past dues for violating the HOA bylaws." He thrust the envelope into my hand even though I was trying to balance 2 cardboard cartons in my arms while I spoke with him. "I'll take a look at it later and get back to you," I replied. "If you don't, I'll be back," said Rupert. "Some of you people think you can just move in and not pay your share of the expenses that it takes to run a county, and that is not right." "Why is that man so angry, Daddy?" asked my oldest son Kevin when Rupert left. "I don't know, son," I replied, "but there's nothing to worry about." Well, I'm not in the habit of lying to my son, and the events that followed proved me wrong. There was indeed plenty that needed to be worried about. Fast forward a week and Rupert returned to my ranch. This time I was in the corral getting to know some of the horses on the ranch. The sound of the car pulling into the yard startled me. "You didn't pay up yet," said Rupert. "What's your delay?" From everything I can find in my father's office, including a stack of bills from your association that he filed away, I don't owe anything because my father never joined the HOA and ranchers are under no obligation to be part of anything that they don't wish to be. "If you want to have an association, that's fine, but leave me out of it," I said. "Everyone around here belongs to it," said Rupert, "and they benefit from the rewards." "What rewards?" I asked. "From everything I found, ranchers don't generally join the HOA because our operations are so far out of the scope of what you normally control. Besides, my ranch is not even near the town. It takes a full half hour for us to even go to get any sort of groceries, and my kids are on the bus an hour each way to school." "There are plenty of rewards," said Rupert, "including protection of the neighborhood watch." "Well, that might be fine if I was in the neighborhood," I replied, "but I cannot even see my neighbor's place and they cannot see mine. At least not much, other than some open fields." "Why do you ranchers think you're above the law?" "Well, let me check into things with my lawyer," I said. "If he says I need to pay, I will, but I don't think I need to be a member. My father lived on this ranch his whole life and was never a member." "Why waste money on lawyers when you could just pay up and be happy?" asked Rupert. "Well, I'm not interested," I replied. "I just want to keep to myself and get acquainted with this land I grew up on. When did this HOA even come in? I never heard my father speak of it." "Your father has never joined and we let it slide for a bit, but his bills are now yours and you're putting a serious drain on HOA finances." "I'm not even using your services, so why should I be a part of it?" I answered. Rupert handed me a pamphlet and told me to read all about it and to pay my bill. I looked at the pamphlet later that day when I had finished outside, and while they promised all sorts of things, I didn't see how it could help me on the ranch when I was quite far away from them and not even living in a residential development. However, since I knew Rupert likely would not let up, I consulted a lawyer about the legitimacies of the HOA and whether or not I was really obliged to pay the fees. He said that I could not be forced to pay the supposed past due monies because my father had never joined the association and that ranches and farms were actually exempt from being a part of these association given that they were often in neighborhoods that were more gentrified and held completely different rules than what farmers and ranchers would usually follow. Things like curfews on a ranch could not be upheld because ranchers were subject to weather conditions and seasons when it came to doing things like getting in the crops. Soon though, other members of the HOA came around and began to harass me. They said that if people like me did not pay up, they would be forced to pay significantly higher HOA fees themselves, and that my delinquency was an issue that needed to be dealt with. I explained to them what the lawyer had told me. However, it did not stop them from coming and coming. It was a major intrusion to my routine and that of my wife and kids. I consulted my lawyer and asked what I could do. He suggested I meet with the local law enforcement. I headed into town the next day and they told me that they could drive out my way occasionally, but since I was far from the majority of their citizens, it could depend on the other calls they were getting. They also told me that any interventions took proof if they didn't catch the HOA in the process of bothering us. I was thankful for the police's extra patrols, despite the fact that they might not be that often. I tried to concentrate on work around the ranch, something I had not really done much of since before I left for college, but as my ranch hands told me, it was in my blood and it would just take time to get to the level of skills that my dad had. A few days later and I got home from being out with the cattle on the ranch and found a note from my wife that she had rushed our family's pet dog to the vet because it had been deathly ill. She came home and said that the veterinarian thought they could save it, but that it had been poisoned. Hoover would be at the vet's clinic for several days, receiving treatment. And what did I also find in my mailbox on the same day? Yes, it was another warning from Rupert and his HOA demanding that I pay up. While I suspected they had something to do with Hoover being poisoned, I had absolutely no proof and there was no way that I could go around pointing fingers at people without getting myself in trouble. A few days later I got up and found that my car's windows had been broken and it had been spray painted. But once again, I had no proof. Before things got worse, I vowed to get to the bottom of it. I no longer felt safe on my own property and I could not let that stand. I filed a police report about the vandalism, but without proof they couldn't do much. Yet the interference from the HOA did not end here. I pressured my lawyer to do more, digging into the legitimacy of the HOA itself because of all the issues I'd been having. I suspected that I couldn't be the only one who was experiencing harassment from them. I was just so busy on my ranch that I rarely got the opportunity to socialize with my neighbors to know if they were a part of the association or if they too received threats from the HOA. My research on the internet turned up a number of lawsuits which had been started by Rupert, but the results of them were sealed. I decided to hire a private investigator to see what he could find about Rupert and the HOA's activities, especially after I found out that some of the HOA members were watching my kids at school. My kids recognized people and cars that they'd seen parked near our home. I had not expected them to be targeting a school. None of the members had tried to approach them yet, but I didn't plan to let anything bad happen to my kids at the hands of a crazy man and his members who wanted my money. And from what I could tell, it had a lot more to do with power than with money, because they had yet to file any paperwork against me to go to court about the past due HOA fees, despite having threatened to do so. I contacted the police and they promised to increase security in the sector. But despite knowing that my children would be safer because of the police presence, I found myself crying that night when I went to bed. I was exhausted and didn't know what to do. I thought that my wife was sleeping, but she was awake. "What can I do?" she asked. "I don't know," I answered. "I don't even know what I can do." And maybe what I'm thinking is insane and irrational, but what if my dad's heart attack was not natural? After everything that happened with Hoover and then my car and the harassment, I cannot help but wonder what my dad might have been going through that he didn't tell us about. "That is something we will never know," said Kathy. "So you better not to drive yourself crazy thinking about it." She pulled me into her arms and held onto me for a long time. The private investigator ended up finding out that many of my neighbors had also been targeted by the HOA. Many of them were like me, just so busy trying to care for their families and ranches that they didn't get the chance to visit other neighbors that often. If anything, I decided that a ranchers association or a group would be useful. We needed a way to communicate about things that impacted us all and not let things get so far out of hand. My private investigator had connections with the police force and was able to get crap done. What happened next became a major police case, but I didn't know this yet, and it was only 6 weeks later that I had answers and peace of mind again. Rupert had been using an alias and was actually a man named Mosley who was wanted in an embezzlement scheme in another state. The HOA was just a front for him to run his business, and a lot of the members were on his payroll. He stole funds from unsuspecting farmers and ranchers who could not even join HOAs and used that money for his outrageous parties and buying vehicles. Now though, there was proof and we could take back our lives. It didn't take long for the story to break in the local newspapers, and Rupert, or Mosley, ended up fleeing the area only to be caught on a warrant a few counties over. And once it did, people began coming forward, and more the terror that had been happening in our community because of Rupert/Mosley and his associates became known. The HOA got disbanded, and some of the former members, and especially Rupert, ended up in prison for a multitude of charges, including embezzlement, fraud, and extortion. Suffice to say, we are all much better off now, and the community can finally heal. And yeah guys, if you still enjoy the HOA stories, please don't forget to like the video, since that would help me tremendously. The next one is an amazing story from r/malicious compliance. Back in the early 2000s, I was collecting all my change in one of those big plastic water jugs for water dispensers. I had it about 60% full and needed to cash them in to make ends meet. And damn, that is a ton of coins. So I lugged this thing into my local bank. Now, I learned the hard way prior to this that the bank would not accept pre-rolled coins. They told me there was no way to verify that the rolls contained actual coins, and that they would have to rip every one of them open to verify. After the explanation, it made sense, but it was kind of frustrating since I spent the money and time to roll all these coins up thinking I was helping them out. So this time I kept them all loose in the jug. I also know they have one of those coin counting machines because I see them use it the last time, and it made light work of all the coins they had unwrapped from the rolls. But then again, it had been a few years since I last did this, so here I was waiting in line for the next available teller with my jug of loose change, probably weighing 40 to 50 pounds worth. When my time came, I waddled the jug up to the base of the teller desk and told them that I wanted to cash it in. This is where they told me that they charged something like a 10% fee to count the change. I turned my head to the right where there was a small room, and sure enough, that same coin counting machine was sitting in there. I said, "You're not counting it, you're just pouring it into that machine and it will count it for you." They simply replied, "It's just our policy, sir." I then said, "You're my bank, isn't it a service you're supposed to provide to me?" And they said, "We charge the same rate for everyone," so I asked how much they would take without charging me the fee, and they said $50. So then I knelt down, tipped the jug over, and poured as much of it into my hand as possible, and put a couple handfuls worth onto the counter. Looking perturbed, she counted it all by hand, and gave me maybe $22 and some change. I put it into my wallet, grabbed my jug, and dragged it to the back of the line behind two other customers. When it was my turn again, I waddled up there and knelt down and placed a couple handfuls of coins on the high counter. When I stood back up, you could tell she was pretty perturbed about what I was doing, and eventually just gave in. She told me to bring the jug over to the swinging door at the end of the desk, and with the help of another teller, they started pouring it into the coin machine. I made the point to tell them that I knew almost to the cent how much was in there, so don't try to pull any fast ones on me. About 10 minutes later, it had chewed through all the coins, and the total came to within a few bucks of my own count. Might have had a handful of Canadian coins in there, or some likely miscount due to worn coins. I remember it ended up being over $1,000 in pocket change, but I cannot recall the actual total, but that was the last time I saved coins. Nowadays, I hear most banks won't do this at all and will just refer you to those coin counting machines you see at hardware stores or Walmart that rob you of a large percentage of the total. The next one is titled The Big Car Revenge. I submerged my car on a flooded road outside my apartment complex a few years back. I did not realize it was flooded, turned into the street doing about 30 to 35 miles per hour, and splish splash, I was taking a bath. The street was constructed in a U-shape, with there being a large bowl where the water gathered. Unfortunately, there was only a small storm drain on either side of the road. I documented the scene, took videos of the day, and then videos a day or two later when it flooded again. Witnesses at the time told me they had lived in the area for years and it flooded every winter. I then sued the county, provided them with ample evidence, the cost of repairs, the loss of value in the car, loss of wages as my only means of transportation was damaged for a few weeks, as well as the cost of a rental car and the cost of labor. They attempted to say that the streets were designed to withstand a 10-year flood, and as the day in question was heralded as the storm of the century for my region, they said it was an act of God. I quickly countered their claim with video evidence of the street flooding a few days later. I let them know that it was not as substantial as the day I wrecked my car, as the water had been almost covering about 1/3 of the fire hydrant you can see in the video. Children were literally swimming across the street. I won 80-some odd% of my claim. They did not want to go to court over the issue, as they would have to pay more lawyer fees than what they had already paid and could very well likely wind up paying a good portion of the claim anyway. Fast forward a few months and it floods again. I see a guy in a similar situation as mine. He drove into the water and effed his car up. I jot down my phone number and my previous claim number, make him a copy of the form used to file suit against the county, and tell him the situation. I tell him to contact me to be a witness if things got that far. I let him know that I had contacted the transportation department hours ago and they never showed up. They did not detour the road, they did not close it due to flooding, they did not open up the drains. They knew of the issue hours before he wrecked his car. A few months later, wouldn't you know it, the county repaired the road and added proper drainage. And the next one is titled, Revenge After the Job is Done. So, a few years after I started my business, I was asked to clean up and optimize a number of PCs in multiple locations, as well as set up some forms and templates for a new client who owned a local restaurant. The work or labor, apart from little travel, was performed over the space of a month due to scheduling conflicts and school holidays, but on completing the last of it, the client confirmed verbally that he was happy with all I had done and to go ahead and send an invoice. I duly emailed an invoice for a sum just in excess of £400. I waited for payment, never heard anything, sent reminder emails, called and left messages, but no response. Eventually, a couple of busy months had passed and I met the client by chance in the local supermarket. On asking why he had not paid or been in touch, he said that all the PCs were as bad as they had been before I had started and that he had tried to contact me with no success. As my landline and mobile phone had caller display as well as answering services and there had been no emails, I knew the latter was BS, and as any PC user knows, a system can easily go back to pot if the user's bad habits don't change. So I contacted a local debt collector, gave him the details, printouts of my call logs and post-invoicing emails, and he took them to the restaurateur. On his return, his words were, "He is not disputing the invoice, he is saying that the work was not done right, so it's his word against yours." I queried if it was worth taking the guy to small claims, to which the debt collector said, "Even if you could prove that he confirmed he was satisfied with the work, they might insist you get his computer back to their pre-invoice state again. Do you really want to spend more time doing that?" Of course the answer was no, so I stewed it over in my mind and came up with a plan. At this point it was late November, so creating 2 throwaway email accounts in female names, I got in touch with the restaurant to book a large party for Valentine's night the following February. I put it down as my husband's surprise 40th birthday party, confirmed that my husband's sister, and CC'd her in the message with the other throwaway, could not make the journey north but would happily pay the £10 per head deposit as her share towards the night. Of course, as time went on, the ideas grew arms and legs. The numbers attending increased until the owner suggested he would reserve the whole restaurant for the evening and they would happily arrange the seating to suit us. But could I ensure the deposit was sorted ASAP, please? Of course, I confirmed that the sister was a scatterbrain and that I would ensure that check was with him very soon. He emailed the sister using the CC address and she confirmed it had been posted. To keep him on site, I asked for a proposed menu in advance so that I could send it to all the attendees for pre-ordering. Naturally, they were delighted that they would know this, as it makes their life much easier. Consequently, the numbers for all 3 courses were emailed in, with a few fuzzy eater variables thrown in for good measure. Needless to say, by the beginning of February he was getting quite antsy about there being no sign of the deposit, but I reassured him that the sister's check must have been lost in the post, so she would send another one by special delivery if they could ensure someone was there to sign for it. If I knew the owner lived about 25 miles away and the restaurant did not open till 5 PM, so he would have to come in very early and hang around waiting for it. So, a week before D-Day, and he would obviously had enough. He emailed in a spat saying that they had turned away numerous inquiries, had no deposit and could no longer hold back on taking other bookings. This time I did not bother replying, my part was done. My wife at the time and I were booked in at another restaurant close by for our Valentine's meal, after which we took a walk past the restaurateur's business premises to see just 2 cars in their parking lot, one of which was his. I'm not sure how much he must have lost out on that night, but knowing his prices I would bet it was significantly more than the £400 I had invoiced him. Of course, lessons were learned by me too. Get written or email confirmation of job satisfaction for one, and not letting new clients go unbilled for too long was another. Naturally, I had no hesitation letting all and sundry know how he had behaved either, so he was blacklisted or forced to pay upfront for any work by IT and other professionals I knew locally. And the next one is titled, Should Have Treated Me Right. I currently work at a drug/alcohol residential treatment center. I used to do the same thing somewhere else though. The pay sucked and the commute sucked, but my coworkers absolutely rocked. They were worth the crap pay and 50-mile one-way commute. I was always on time, I never complained about anything. I did my job well for the most part, and when I screwed up, I would always take responsibility and fix it. Same with my work bestie. However, my boss liked to pick on us. She would come into the nursing station just to yell at us and tell us about how she doesn't trust us, and she loved to remind us about how much she did not really need us. One day after a particularly bad abuse session, I've sent HR an email about her behavior, one of many emails I've sent. And they told me to go F myself. It brought up all those memories of getting bullied in school and no one did anything about it. My depression and anxiety got so bad I came pretty much close to ending myself. But then I stopped and said, F it, I'm a nurse. I can get a better job with better pay and better treatment and a closer commute, so I did. I quit the job and that's all I did. I wrote the most bland 2-week notice I could and I sent it to HR, management and the nursing department. That same day, 2 other people quit. And during those 2 weeks, 3 more people quit. And in the month since I got my new job and a total of 8 nurses quit. Now, staffing is so bad that my boss had to move into the facility to live there and be on site 24/7, all because she was mean to me and my friend. She has a sick husband at home and she does not even see him anymore. And to make it even better, they had a mass firing at our sister facility, which is much closer to my home. They have far fewer patients. So I joined an agency and get sent there weekly to collect more than $400 a pop for doing next to no work on a 12-hour shift. So now they are paying me to scroll Reddit and wear track pants just because they need a warm body there and they cannot say anything. So that is my petty revenge. Don't F with nurses. And before we end the video, we will read an interesting story from r/petty revenge. It is titled, Gifting Daughter Presents Meant for Husband's Side Piece. So back in 2019, we went on a Christmas trip to see my now ex-husband's sister Jill. She was acting strange and would not talk to me. His sister, whom I have only met one time before, ignored me. I was wrapping presents we had sent to Jill's and Joe, and Jill went outside for a period. When we went back to pack up, Joe was very concerned about his backpack, only he could touch it. I thought this was odd, but whatever. A month prior to leaving, I found a prepaid card in his wallet. I took it to see what he would say. He asked about it and said it was for work. I found it and gave it back to him, but about a week later I asked if he was having an affair. He said no, and I dropped it. We may have not been in love for quite a while, and I knew that we were heading towards a divorce. Upon return from the trip, something told me to look in his backpack. So while he was showering, I looked and found 2 bracelets and a gift bag. I took the 2 bracelets and hid them. All was well until he went to the car to leave. He came storming in demanding I give the bracelets back. I simply replied, "What bracelets?" He said he bought them for me for our anniversary next month. Well, he knows I don't wear bracelets and I actually hate them. Why would he be freaking out if the bracelets were for a month later? He's storming out and we didn't talk about it again. So then I was finally able to get in his phone and discover text messages coming confirming the affair. On to my revenge. 2 years later, we are divorcing. I'm cleaning our rooms, helping him pack. While cleaning, I found the 2 bracelets I had hid years ago and forgot about. I did not want them, but our middle child, female 15, loves jewelry. We were separated but decided to have Christmas at the house together, so Christmas morning comes, the kids are opening gifts. The look on Joe's face as our daughter opens the bracelets was priceless. They were rose gold, her favorite. Her face was beaming with joy. He sat there looking at the jewelry like a deer in headlights. And yeah guys, thank you for watching. Please check out my endless playlist on the left if you cannot get enough of my videos, and I will see you again tomorrow.